Welcome to the Hope Sports Podcast, where each week athletes share about on-field experiences that shape their careers and the off-field moments that bring them purpose. I'm your host, Olympic gold medalist Laura Wilkinson. This week, you are in for a real treat as we have Super Bowl champion Clint Gresham joining us. As a former Seattle Seahawks long snapper, Clint played in back-to-back Super Bowls, and he shares about how he had to come to grips with his unexpected reactions to both victory and defeat. He has such a balanced and well-rounded perspective that has developed out of some pretty incredible highs and devastating lows. It's definitely a perspective that I needed to hear, and I'm excited for you to discover it as well. So without further ado, here is his impactful story. Clint Gresham, thank you so much for being on the Hope Sports Podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, for those of us who don't know how awesome you are, can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got your start in football?
Yeah, so I grew up in Texas, and which meant that if I wanted to have friends, I had to play football because that's the thing you do in Texas. And my dad played football at the University of Texas back in the 70s, and he played with a guy named Earl Campbell, who was an absolute legend in college and professionally. And I remember being a kid and going to UT football camps and going to games when I was a kid and just being so overwhelmed at the magnitude of what these guys were doing. And
that registered for you that young? Like you understood the magnitude of it?
Well, like going into Darrell Royal Stadium in Austin and there's 80,000 people there and I'm 10 years old. I mean, it was just an overwhelming experience. And had a couple of times where I had met a couple of the Longhorn football players. And so I fell in love with the game and ended up transferring to a public school so that I could play football in 7th and 8th grade. And because my private Christian school, we didn't have football. And it was kind of just one of those things that as I went, I started to love it more and more. And I think a lot of it is I felt like football happened to me. I was just kind of in the right place at the right time. And I kind of look around and it's like now all of a sudden I'm playing professionally and playing in a couple of Super Bowls. And it was all kind of a blur, but still really, really thankful for everything that I picked up along the way.
Yeah. And for people who aren't familiar with how big football is in Texas, I'm a Texas girl. And I mean, there's a Texas high school football magazine. So it is a big deal here. I get that.
Yeah. There's a high school just up the road from us in Allen, Texas. And they've got like a $90 million stadium.
For the high school?
Like for a high school.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
okay,
it's not a joke here.
No, it's definitely not a joke. Now, so those awesome, overwhelming early days in the big UT Stadium and Hook'em for all our Austin people out there. I'm a Longhorn also. From that point, did you dream of being in the NFL or was it just playing football and that's what you wanted to do?
I think every kid dreams or every boy dreams of being in the NFL, just like every kid wants to be an astronaut type of thing. I wanted to play football in college, and I don't know if I ever really thought past that. And once I got into high school and I started to kind of figure out my niche, I was a long snapper. So I realized I was pretty good at that and that my times were comparable to professional players. And I think that I thought that I could have a shot, like once I got into high school. And was kind of surprised that it actually worked out.
Mm-hmm. So how did it actually play out? Like, how did you land that spot in the NFL? And was that kind of everything you had hoped it would be?
I was the only long snapper invited to the NFL scouting combine in 2010. And I remember thinking that was like a pretty incredible, like obviously opportunity, but just thinking like, wow, like they couldn't find another guy to come and compete with me. Like I must have a shot at this. And my rookie year was incredibly, incredibly hard. I was living by myself in kind of like a month-to-month apartment situation. I started my career with the Saints and I was only there for 3 months and one day in a training camp, I got released, and I thought that my football career was over. And I drive back to Fort Worth, Texas, back to where I was living at the time. And then the Seahawks called me and told me they'd picked up my contract. And so I flew out to Seattle and was very, very alone when I was out there. And I think I was not ready for what that was going to look like. I had some community when I was in college, but as far as like, was it everything that I dreamed of? I would say no. I think that it's pretty rare that somebody gets their dream and thinks that this is everything that I thought it was going to be, because usually it's not. When we won Super Bowl 48, it was a good 6 months that all of us were saying, I keep waiting for it to sink in that we won the Super Bowl. And that year when we beat the Broncos, when we beat them 43-8, I mean, just absolutely crushed them. And everybody had the Broncos pick to win. And we just took them apart. But for 6 months, we all kept saying, I keep waiting for it to sink in that we won the Super Bowl. And I realized what all of us meant by that was not, I keep waiting for it to sink in, but I keep waiting for this thing to make me happy like I thought it would. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't. And now I'm actually kind of scared because I've made this my life's pursuit. Yeah. And so all of us are chasing a Super Bowl in some capacity. I mean, maybe if you're a salesperson, I want to get this many sales, or whatever your dream or goal is. I think that's one thing that I picked up when I was playing, was that when we never really talked about wins and losses. Like the night before Super Bowl 48 and Super Bowl 49, when we played against the Patriots, we didn't even talk about the other team. We talked about things that we could control, like our effort, our preparation, our enthusiasm. And by focusing on the things that we could control, the outcomes sort of take care of themselves. And so I always encourage people, focus on the process, focus on those kinds of things, because to try and tether your sense of joy and happiness to a particular outcome is either going to blow you apart if you don't get it, or it's going to fill you with so much zeal that it's like a drug that you're not going to have any drive once you achieve it. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, yeah.
Such good wisdom.
Ride, sure.
Yeah. Such good advice and wisdom. I love that. Well, and so you're kind of like just leading into the next thing I was going to ask you is you won Super Bowl 48. And I know you wrote a really good blog post about what that was like and what it taught you about work ethic. And then the next year was a totally different outcome. Can you kind of take us through the extremes of both of those and what that was like and what went through your head? And kind of like you mentioned, you guys were asking for 6 months, like, when's it going to sink in? And then you had to get back up and do it again. So can you kind of take us through that whole like 2 seasons?
Yeah, it was a never ending ride. I mean, I feel like the 2012 season, we drafted Russell Wilson and we ended up going to the playoffs for the first time in, I think, like 5 seasons or something. And, that season all the way through like the 2015 season just felt like one long season. Because 2012 led into 2013, we ended up going to the Super Bowl, we win the Super Bowl, and then all the stuff that comes with winning the Super Bowl. I mean, you're talked about everywhere.
So there was a big parade too, right? Like kind of all the craziness, right?
Yeah, the parade was insane. We had 1 million people in downtown Seattle. It was like 35 degrees outside, and it was a bizarre experience. We were driving on these giant military trucks, and I remember I was standing on top of the roof of one of these military trucks, and I'm like 15 feet off the ground, and we pull up to this intersection, and you can see down the road, like going all 4 directions, and it's like 3 blocks deep. It's just a sea of people.
Wow.
And it's just bizarre. And so like everything that came with that was absolutely overwhelming. And then going into the next season, we start off, I don't remember what we started off at. I know that we didn't start off that season well, but we ended up making it back to the Super Bowl. and we're playing against the Patriots. We're on the 1 yard line. We're about to win back-to-back Super Bowls, and then we throw an interception and we lose the game in the end zone. And it was such a just debilitating moment. I remember I didn't even see it happen when the interception was thrown. And when I realized what had happened, I literally fell to the ground, because it was just like, you feel so much weight, like the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, but then just the weight of the previous several seasons. And I remember we walk into the locker room and some guys are not handling it well. And our head coach says a couple of words to the team. And then he looks at me and he's like, "Okay, Gresh, go ahead and pray for us now." And I'm like completely at a loss for words. Like, oh my gosh, like what can I possibly say here that's going to make this moment not be painful?
Right.
And I kind of felt like this internal pressure of, I'm trying to relieve everyone from this sense of pain. And in retrospect, I think that thought is really profound, because like the second that we start running from our pain is usually when we get addicted to something, because that's what addiction is all about. Like, you feel something uncomfortable on the inside of you, so you look to something external to make that pain go away. And really what we needed to do in that moment was just accept it and feel it and not try and run from it. It's just learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's the only way that we grow. And just personally, like, I had realized that was kind of a pattern in my life, and it kind of used God as this escape of, I'm just going to pray this pain away. And what I really want to do is just learn how to be okay with it and have the courage to deal with it, because it's only there that we grow and become stronger. So it was kind of a just profound learning moment for me, and I think for our team as well.
So I have to ask you, I mean, what did you say? What did you pray?
I said, "Jesus, please curse the Patriots." I don't know. I blacked out. I have no idea what I said. I'm sure it was not a very eloquent prayer. But it was, just that we would learn from this and move on. But, it's like anything that you say, it's not going to really make it go away.
Right.
So, being comfortable with the uncomfortable is really, that's the sweet spot. If I can just be okay with it, man, you're unstoppable in that space.
Oh, so well said. So well said. Well, now after that, I know the Seahawks signed you to a 3-year contract, but you were released after just a year. Did you kind of see that coming, or was that a surprise? And how did you deal with that?
I didn't have a great season in the 2015 season. Like I mentioned earlier, it just felt like 2012 through 2015 was just one long season. And, people end up getting, battle fatigue, where it's just like, I can't do this another day. And I think that was starting to happen with me, where I felt like I just couldn't do anything to really get to the place that I was expected to be. Looking back, I can see that pretty clearly. In the moment, it was totally surprising. And I kind of thought that they were going to be bringing me back, and didn't really end up happening. I actually ended up getting a call from them right at the end of the season, because their long snapper went on IR, and they needed somebody to come and play for them for the playoff game against the Lions. And I had actually found out the day before that I had torn my labrum in my shoulder.
Ooh.
And wasn't going to be able to take them up on that. And so that was really challenging, because I had been staying ready and trying to be prepared for that opportunity, because I felt like it was going to be inevitable. But yeah, the Lord seemed to have closed that door, and just had to trust him through that.
Well, so at what point in all of this did you meet your sweet wife, Maddie?
We met, that was in 2012 was the first time that we met. We were both young life leaders, And Young Life was a huge part of who I was when I was playing football up in Seattle. I had a house up there, and we had meetings every week, and it was right next to the high school. And so Young Life is a ministry for high school kids and middle school kids. And we would probably have like 100 kids a week coming through our house for Bible study or Young Life Club. And so she was a fellow leader, and it was awesome kind of just getting to grow together, like while we were both doing Young Life. And I think the best thing about it was that the first time I met her, I saw her from across the room, and I just see this tall, beautiful brunette, and she's talking in this Texan accent. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I gotta have that girl. And come to find out, she was from Texas also. I was like, what are you doing up here? So she grew up in Lubbock, and so I found a Texas gal up in Seattle. So it made moving back to Texas once my football career was over a pretty easy decision.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, so now the NFL Players Association, they have a new program called The Trust, where they do a brain and body scan, and it was launched to help ex-players with their health after football. And I think just this past May, right, you decided to take advantage of that. What did they find?
So I had kind of felt this bump like behind my ear for a while, and I'd asked the doctor about it, and he said it was like just a cyst or something, and I just didn't think about it. And I had started to notice some kind of cognitive things that I thought might have been related to concussions or something. And so I went in, I did this thing, and they took an MRI of my head, and I'm sitting in this chair looking at the computer screen, and she shows the MRI, and we find this huge mass that's right where that little bump was. And I'm looking at this thing thinking, what the heck is that? And the doctor looks at me, and she kind of panics for a second. She's like, I need to go get the other doctor. And she storms out of the room. And I'm sitting there with my 6-month pregnant wife thinking, oh my gosh, I've got brain cancer or something. I have no idea. And doctor comes back in, and he kind of calms us down, and he says, well, we want to do a biopsy and just check out what it was. And the biopsy came back benign, which we were really thankful of. And the doctor kind of said, hey, like, you need to get this removed at some point. No pressure, kind of do it whenever. And kind of forgot about it at that point. And when we got back to Texas, I had reached out to a doctor to just have him check it out, the doctor that they referred me to. And he had a little bit more urgency about it. And he was saying, hey, we should get this removed. Left untreated, this particular kind of tumor, which was in my parotid gland, so thankfully it had not metastasized and gotten into my brain. He said that this particular kind of tumor can get bad really fast. So we ended up removing it, and we had it removed a week before our little girl was born. And
a week before?
A week before, yeah. And
oh my goodness.
After I had woken up after the surgery, the doctor said that was one of the most difficult tumors I've ever had to remove. The tumor was completely wrapped around your facial nerve. So there was a very high risk of having facial paralysis. And it's like, all you need is a little bit of facial paralysis to feel insecure. Like,
right.
Like just a little bit, to just be conscious of it all the time. And so thankfully he got that all removed. But it was a terrifying experience. I mean, you know, you hear the word tumor and you go to the worst case scenario, and here I am a week before our little girl is about to be born, and you can just go to a scary place. And thankfully I had
how do you not go to the scary place? And like, how did your wife handle all of this? I cannot imagine about to have a kid, your husband's undergoing brain surgery, which I'm sure even the most mundane brain surgery is not safe, you know?
And thankfully it wasn't brain surgery. They didn't have to get like into my skull. It was on the outside of my skull. Okay. Thankfully. But just the same, like, it's still terrifying. It's still a tumor. It's still, the possibility of cancer and all of that. And actually the day that my wife went into labor, we were in the hospital that night. And, I found out that I'll say I started to notice some pain on my surgery site. And so I went and I talked to the nurse and I said, "Hey, can you just take a look at this thing? I had this surgery done last week." And she looks at it and she's like, "I think that looks infected. You should go to the ER to have it looked at." And so my wife was asleep at the time, because we were going to be going into labor the next day. And, I was just going to try and sneak down there because I didn't want to scare her. And, the doctor looks at it, and sure enough, the surgery site had gotten infected. And so I'm like laying on my back, and I've got an IV in my arm of antibiotics, and they're giving me morphine because I was in a ton of pain. And then probably 30 minutes after I left to go down there, my wife texts me. She says, "I'm going into labor right now. Where are you?"
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, "Well, I'm just out walking around." And like, I was trying to not tell her what was happening. And finally, after, an hour or so, I had to tell her, like, "Hey, this thing kind of got a little scary. I'll be up as soon as I can." And thankfully got everything covered and was able to be there for the delivery. But it was an intense night for sure.
Oh man, I cannot even imagine. Yes, from both of your perspectives. At least you both weren't on the hospital bed together in the same room.
Yeah.
Just not.
Yeah, no kidding.
Ooh. And you can't make up stories that good. So how is your little baby now?
She's amazing and has tapped into a part of my soul I didn't even know I had. It's just been, it's been the best, and has totally changed like who I am and how I see God and how I see the world. Like I remember my parents saying, like, something happens to you when you have a kid. And, when you're a kid and a young adult, you hear cliches like that all the time, and you kind of roll your eyes at it. And then it happens to you, and it's all of a sudden everything makes sense. And it's been beautiful, and we've loved it. And it's brought our family together. It's brought my wife and I closer. And, we wouldn't change a thing. And she's sleeping well, which is a dream.
That is a dream. Good. Well, congratulations. That is so awesome. Being a parent is definitely, I think, the best thing on the planet.
Yeah, no kidding.
So today, now, you are an international speaker and a best-selling author. I would love for you to tell us about your book, Becoming: Loving the Process to Wholeness, because I'm itching to get it, and I want the workbook, and I want the iTalk. Like, please tell us about all of these things that you've created, because I just think they're so good.
Yeah, so I started writing the book shortly after I had gotten released. And the reason that I chose the word becoming was because that word is an adjective and it's also a verb. We are all becoming something, but to be becoming is to be attractive. And so what does it look like to like who you are when you haven't become the person you feel like you're supposed to be? And I think all of us can find us in that place of feeling frustrated about how much we have in front of us, and we see everybody's kind of perfectly manicured versions of their lives on social media, and we compare everybody else's highlight reel to the entirety of our lives. And it can be frustrating. Like, I can find myself in that place. And so the book helps people embrace the process, build their life on identity that can't be taken away from you. Because ultimately anything that we place our sense of worth in that can be taken away, whether it's wealth or status or whatever it is going to create a very fragile life. And when I look at people that I have played with, I mean, all of us got to the top. I mean, there's no higher that you can get. And then when you look at the statistics of ex-NFL players, and I would say it's even broader than NFL players. I mean, ex-athletes, I mean, people who have gotten to the top and have have made it their life's pursuit, once they're done with that, there can be this reckoning that happens where, is this really all that there is? And I went through that, like even knowing that I could say or preach a message that my identity is not in football, my identity is in who God says that I am. Inevitably, any of us are going to put some of our sense of worth in what we do. That's just how it is. And so the book will help guard people from that, because it's one of those things that we don't realize that we're doing it, and we assume that we're okay until it happens. And I feel thankful because I was kind of forced into, okay, who am I really 30 years before a lot of my peers? So it kind of just gave me a unique perspective about life. And yeah, there's a workbook that goes along with it. And the I Talk cards that I created, they're biblically based affirmations to train our self-talk so that we think like God thinks and see our situation as God sees it. So this deck of 52 cards, and on one side is an affirmation and the other side is the scripture that supports that truth. And I'm looking at one of these right now, and it says, I let others make mistakes. And then the other side of it is from the Message version. It's Matthew 7:2. It says, don't pick on people, jump on their failures, or criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. So I am okay giving people grace because I also want to have grace. And so it's just a practical way to get the principles of the word into our hearts so that we can live from those principles. And I've realized that they're really helpful with teaching kids kind of what's going on behind scripture, because I think it's great to memorize scripture. What's more important is to have the scripture so inside of us so that it actually affects our life. You know, like I don't want just words. Like I want change in my life. So yeah. And that's all.
That is awesome. Well, yes. And please tell us, where can we get our copy? Because as soon as we get off of this interview, I'm getting my copy. So where can we go to get a copy of Becoming, and where else can we follow you online?
ClintGresham.com is my website where people can pick up my stuff or follow my blog or book for opportunities and speaking events. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all of that stuff. So I'm pretty easy to find out there.
At Clint Gresham?
At Gresh49.
Okay. At Gresh49.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Clint, so much for being on today. And we are just excited to continue to follow your journey and learn from all of your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks to Clint for joining me on today's episode. I love his advice to focus on the pieces of our journey that we can control. Clearly, that perspective carried him through some incredibly intense experiences. And although we might not all be prepping for a Super Bowl, there are challenges that we all have to walk through. And like he phrased so perfectly, we can't tether ourselves to the outcome. Check out more from Clint on his awesome blog, which I love, along with his book and website. All of those details you can find in the show notes and at hopesports.org, where you can find all of our past conversations. On the next episode, we have 4-time Iditarod champion Dallas Seavey sharing about what it was like to become the youngest person ever to win that event. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. And please leave us a review, because those reviews help us continue to get awesome guests on this show to keep inspiring you. I'm Laura Wilkinson. Thanks again for listening. This podcast is produced by Evo Terra and Simpler Media.